Good morning, everybody. Relatives who lost loved ones to COVID have said they feel sick seeing a photo apparently showing the Prime Minister at a garden gathering during lockdown last year. Downing Street says it was a staff meeting. There was cheese and wine, and Boris Johnson's wife Carrie and baby Wilf also appear to be photographed. Sky News has been unable to independently confirm the date of the Guardian's exclusive photograph. Labour has called for the truth. That fresh pressure on Boris Johnson comes as scientists call for tougher restrictions to be brought in now to stop the spread of Omicron. What will the government do? The Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, with us very shortly. First, here's Emma Birchley.
Cheese and wine on the lawn of Downing Street with the Prime Minister and his wife, while the country languished in lockdown. According to the Guardian exclusive, the photo was taken in May last year, when everyone else was told to meet only one other person outdoors. Number 10 insists it was a work meeting and no rules were broken.
I feel quite sick, actually. I just keep thinking, how much more have me, my family, and 160 other thousand families got to bear?
Obviously he should go, but he's not going to go. There's too many people supporting him from the inside, so...
If you're the leader of the country and you don't set the standard, what do you expect from anybody else?
I think everyone can make mistakes, and I think you should have broad shoulders and just admit to stuff.
The picture emerged as more calls came for action to prevent the rapid spread of Omicron, with doctors predicting the NHS will be left brutally exposed by staff shortages. Despite that, no decisions were made when the Cobra Emergency Committee met yesterday, except to provide more funding for the devolved governments. With so many warnings about what lies ahead, it makes you wonder how much longer people will be able to go out and about like this without further restrictions. And the latest coronavirus figures don't provide any reassurance, with positive cases increasing by more than 50% week on week. And it's not just the NHS under threat. So concerned is the Education Secretary about the impact on school staff that he's made an unashamed call to arms.
Whether you're recently retired or trained as a teacher and have moved profession, I urge you to consider whether you might be able to spare even a day a week. Don't let anything get in the way of coming forward to join the national mission to protect education.
There'll be many parents and pupils who echo the need to keep schools open. And all the time, the government hammers home the message to get vaccinated as the best way to prevent further disruption. But the fact is, further restrictions are becoming ever more likely. And a photo like this may well undermine the desire to toe the line. Emma Birchley, Sky News, Central London.
OK, let's take a look now at the latest COVID data for the UK. The total number of confirmed Omicron cases has increased by more than 12,000, now at 37,100. Ministers say the actual number of cases is thought to be much higher. 7 people have died after contracting the Omicron variant, and the number of those in hospital with the new variant, 85. Looking at coronavirus infections as a whole, almost 83,000 new cases recorded in the last 24 hours. Another 45 deaths, sadly, have been reported within 28 days of a positive test. And that brings the total number of deaths in the UK to 147,218. What about those boosters? If you've seen your papers this morning, there's wraparounds on all the papers asking people to have their booster. Yesterday, 904,000 acquiesced, receiving their booster or third vaccine in the last 24 hours. A record for a single day so far, bringing the total number of those doses to just over 28 million. That's more than half of the adult population in the UK. Meantime, Premier League bosses will meet later today for crisis talks about how to keep football going as COVID cases rise, forcing a weekend of postponements. Aisha joining us now from Chelsea, Stamford Bridge. Hello to you. I think something like half a dozen games were cancelled, or postponed, I should say, over the weekend. Aisha, good morning.
Morning, Kay. That's right. Lots of the fixtures list over the weekend was absolutely decimated. There were 10 games planned. Only 4 of these went ahead. 6 were postponed due to the COVID crisis at the moment. These talks will really be targeting that to decide what happens. The festive fixtures very much up in the air at the moment. Of the games that went ahead, Chelsea versus Wolverhampton Wanderers went ahead. It's a match that Chelsea requested be postponed because of the COVID outbreak within their team, but that request was denied. Chelsea boss Thomas Tuchel said that the match going ahead put players at a high health and safety risk. And of the games that didn't go ahead, one was Aston Villa versus Burnley. The decision for it to be postponed came only 2 hours before kick-off time, which led to frustration amongst the teams, but also fans who'd already made their way. So up until now, the Premier League has said that its intention is for games to go ahead safely where possible, and that postponements are decided on a case-by-case basis. But that, again, has been criticised due to the fact that the criteria does seem uncertain.
OK, thank you. Don't forget talking to the Deputy Prime Minister in just a few moments' time. Meantime, new lockdown restrictions come into force across Ireland this morning to try to stop the rising number of Omicron cases. Until early January, pubs, restaurants and other indoor venues must close at 8 p.m. That includes cinemas and theatres. Indoor venues will be capped at 50% of their capacity, or 1,000 guests if fewer. Outdoor events will also be capped at 50% of their capacity, or 5,000 guests if fewer. Meanwhile, a guest limit of 100 will be introduced for weddings. Thousands of protesters gathering in Brussels last night to demonstrate against Belgium's new COVID restrictions. The government there has said all healthcare workers must be vaccinated within 3 months or face the threat of losing their job. But speaking on American television, Dr. Anthony Fauci from the National Institute of Infectious Diseases said Omicron now posed a serious threat to global public health.
The one thing that's very clear, and there's no doubt about this, is its extraordinary capability of spreading, its transmissibility capability. It is just, raging through the world, really. Clearly, when you travel, there is always a risk of increased infection. That just goes with respiratory illnesses. But if people need to travel and want to travel for the obvious family reasons during this holiday season, if you're vaccinated and you're boosted and you take care when you go into congregate settings like airports to make sure you continually wear your mask, you should be okay.
Still to come on the breakfast programme for you this morning, we'll discuss the chances of another lockdown because of the spread of Omicron when we speak to one of the UK's leading microbiologists. After 7:30, we'll talk to one of thousands of people who can't see their family in France this Christmas because of the latest travel ban. There's been a big increase in rhino poaching across southern Africa. We'll talk to the conservation group Save the Rhino soon. But before all of that, a grandma in Kentucky says 2 babies survived a tornado last weekend by her putting them in the shelter of a bathtub. Clara Lutz says she puts her 2 grandchildren in the bathtub with only a blanket, pillow and Bible. The storm then ripped the tub out of the ground and tossed it with them inside, according to the grandmother. But it was found in the yard upside down with the babies underneath, who sustained only minor injuries. In Kentucky, 75 people have been confirmed dead after last weekend's tornadoes. Also this morning, the tennis star Peng Shuai has spoken to the media for the first time and denied accusing a senior Chinese official of sexually assaulting her. Joining us now is Tom in Beijing. Hi, Tom. Good morning. So she's rowing back on what was said previously.
Morning, Kay. Yeah, it looks like that, but actually the language becomes really important here. I mean, just to refresh your memory on what's been a very twisting tale, back in November, Peng Shuai posted on Weibo, which is a bit like Twitter, saying she'd been forced into sex by Zhang Gaoli, a very, very senior Chinese Communist Party official. Now, after that, the message was scrubbed off the internet. We didn't hear from Peng for a long time. There were calls for her whereabouts to be identified. And then Chinese state media started putting videos out with with her, and the International Olympic Committee said they'd had a video call with her. But what we saw today, or yesterday rather, was that she was in Shanghai in a very public sort of forum, and at that public forum was a reporter from Lianhe Zaobao, which is a Singaporean newspaper, Chinese language newspaper. That reporter caught up with Peng Shuai herself, and here's what she told her.
First and foremost, I must emphasise I have never said or wrote anything about anyone sexually assaulting me. That's a very important point. On the Weibo post, that's my personal issue. I know there are many misunderstandings.
There is a crucial difference there. When she talks about sexual assault, that isn't the language she used in her original post. It's a different term in Chinese. There's a different understanding, really, of what constitutes sexual assault here. But that video, I don't think, will reassure anyone who still has doubts about whether she's free to operate, whether she's free from coercion. It certainly hasn't assuaged the Women's Tennis Association, who put out a statement still calling for an investigation. And as it stands, they're not playing matches in China because of this case. We still haven't really heard from Peng Shuai herself. It's all been third parties. We haven't heard from her voice. Her Weibo, where she made that original post, that original accusation, is still censored here in China.
OK, Tom, thanks. Looking at some of the other stories making headlines for you this Monday morning, more than 200 people are now reported to have died after a huge typhoon hit the Philippines. Super Typhoon Ray struck last Thursday and saw wind speeds of around 120 miles an hour. Rescue workers say the death toll could rise further as search operations continue. US Open champion Emma Raducanu has been voted Sports Personality of the Year 2021. Raducanu was the first British woman in 44 years to take a Grand Slam singles championship. And the return of the space cowboy, a Japanese billionaire, and his film producer have landed back on Earth after spending 12 days at the International Space Station. The fashion tycoon, there he is, Yusaku Mwaisa, touched down in Kazakhstan in the early hours of this morning. He was the first self-paying tourist to visit the space station in more than 10 years. A new experiment is set to see human muscle cells blasted into space in a bid to help people live longer, healthier lives. The experiment, called MicroAge, is set to be launched to the International Space Station on Tuesday. Once in space, the cells will be stimulated to induce contractions in the muscle tissue, and the scientists will look closely to see what happens. Now, we've been having a look at some of the interesting photographs for you in this morning's newspaper. This is what Wadey came up with for you this morning. First mate or primate? The Sun has these pictures of a stowaway green monkeys causing chaos for Royal Navy crew after sneaking on board at Bridgetown in Barbados. The mum is there and baby's just clinging on for dear life. This might look like a gingerbread house. Check this out, but it's actually Lego, built by a Lego fan from Cambridgeshire, actually two of them, using 400,000 pieces, 14 hours a day for a month. And it's their 27th festive build. Would you want to go around for Christmas? Express shows us some of these spectacular shots of Lichfield Cathedral, which has been lit up with kaleidoscope artwork depicting the Nativity. That looks amazing, doesn't it? And The Guardian has this spread right in the middle of the paper, some very close-up shots of birds and a squirrel. And finally, in the Daily Mail, a woman of many roles. The Foreign Secretary, now Brexit Minister, Liz Truss. Lose it looking, here she comes. Rather stately, don't you think? Definitely not a bid for the leadership, is it at all, that photograph? Absolutely not. Don't forget, speaking to the Deputy Prime Minister momentarily. Meantime, the Il Divo singer Carlos Marin has died at the age of just 53.
I guess you'd say, what can make me feel this way, my girl?
In a statement, the group said he would be missed by his friends, family and fans. The quartet was created by Simon Cowell, do you remember, as part of the X Factor back in 2004, nearly 20 years ago, my goodness. somebody else who will be remembered very fondly. Lord Richard Rogers designed a host of famous and perhaps some infamous buildings around the world. Amongst his work was the air traffic control tower at Heathrow Airport. Perhaps one of his best-known projects was the Pompidou Centre in Paris, which is reported to have been visited more than 180 million times since it was opened. Lord Rogers also designed the London skyscraper, officially called Leadenhall, perhaps better known as the cheese grater. It's not in that picture, is it? No, but he also did the Dome in East London. Lord Rogers said the building couldn't have had a worse reception if you'd have worked hard to deliberately upset everybody. Opened 31st of December 1999. Quick look at the weather.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Brighter skies developing this week, but it will turn colder then as Christmas approaches. The weather is set to turn more unsettled, with an increasing risk of rain, sleet and snow.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Ukrainian troops waiting in trenches on the Russian border have told Sky News they're ready to defend themselves if Russian troops attack. International concerns are mounting over heightened Russian military activity near the Ukraine. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, reports in Ukraine near the border with Russia.
It's over 100 years since World War I, but the images of the front lines haven't changed a bit out here. And like the Christmases of the Great War, the troops on both sides, dug into the trenches, are holding out for the new year. Holding out and hoping they'll make it. These are the Ukrainian army's trenches in the east of the country. They snake along a 250-mile demarcation line. Across a narrow no-man's land, a Russian-backed separatist militia, and they're equally well dug in. The narrow walkways and tunnels, the near silence, all add to an eerie sense of foreboding. And there are constant reminders that this is a war. Just past a sign saying, "Beware, sniper." There's been a ceasefire here since 2015, but it's constantly violated, with both sides accusing the other. But Russia's now involved, building up troops, even threatening an invasion. The Ukrainian soldiers think it's a bluff, but they say they're ready anyway.
У нас люди уже реально знают уже конкретно, кто враг, потому что в 2014 году, когда это все начиналось, еще не было такого, в сознаниях людей не было такого, что типа как это так, типа наш ближайший сосед всегда изначально был, типа мы считали их там типа нашими братьями, да, как многие говорят раньше говорили, пойдут в наступление. И мы уже ментально мы уже меняемся, мы уже ментально отходим от Советского Союза, мы уже готовы.
With heat-seeking cameras, the soldiers attempt to monitor the troops and equipment on the separatist side. Their front line is that row of trees. It's barely 100 metres away. Well, despite all the diplomatic moves, conversations between the United States and Russia, and the increasing evidence to show that there are more and more Russian troops, at least gathering not far away, it doesn't actually make much difference to these guys. They're sort of stuck in these World War I style trenches, and they've just got to wait and see if they're attacked or not. They've literally got no choice. These lines aren't as remote as they appear, however. They're actually near where some people still live. These frontline towns in the industrial heartlands of eastern Ukraine are tough-looking reminders of the Soviet past. Those who couldn't leave are stuck in the midst of a continuing conflict. The streets are pretty empty. A few cyclists venture out in the mornings. Amongst them, 13-year-old Danya Kachenko. Every day he gets on his bike to go fishing. He heads to the reservoir that cools a nearby power station. His uncle taught him to build this net before he too left because of the war. What Danya catches, he sells to local markets. With the money, he feeds the town's homeless dogs, abandoned in the evacuation. left behind like this little boy and his mum. The fighting has gone on for half of his life. It's just part of it now.
Когда стреляют, надо прятаться либо в какой-то бугор ложиться, если ты на открытой местности, а если ты в городе, надо либо в подъезд забежать, либо в подвал зайти, если он открытый. Страшно сначала было, а сейчас мы уже как привыкли к этому, то, что там слышим выстрелы автоматов, пулеметов. Как-то уже не очень страшно.
In truth, there are thousands of Danyas all along the demarcation line, caught up in a conflict they can't escape from, learning to live with a war that hasn't stopped for 8 Christmases in a row. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Eastern Ukraine.
Quick look at the papers. Guardian breaks the story of the photo appearing to show the Prime Minister and members of his staff failing to socially distance in the Downing Street garden in May of 2020, at a time when mixing was heavily policed. A Downing Street spokesperson has insisted the gathering was a legitimate work meeting. Talk to the Deputy Prime Minister about that, should we? Quick look at the Mirror. Cases of Omicron variant spiralling, the threat of new restrictions looming. The Mirror declares D-Day for Christmas, with the Prime Minister set to have urgent meetings on today with scientists and his senior team. Let's bring in the Deputy Prime Minister, should we? Mr Raab, good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Kate.
As far as the figures are concerned for Omicron, I've heard you say this morning 12 people sadly died, 104 in hospital. I wonder if I could just peel back a couple more layers on that. 12 deaths. How many were vaccinated?
I'm not sure. What we do know is that a large proportion of those who are in hospital are unvaccinated. I don't know the particular breakdown for Omicron, but of course it strengthens this case for people coming forward and having the booster.
Yeah, which is why I asked you the question. Of the 104 that are in hospital, how many are on ventilators?
Again, I don't have that breakdown, but what you're seeing is the hospitalisation rate at 104, specifically in relation to Omicron, and there's of course a time lag for the figures on the number of fatalities, which is one of the challenges that we have right now in assessing the situation. We rely very heavily on the real data coming through, and it'll take a little bit more time to assess this critical issue of severity of Omicron.
Understood. The South African Health Minister, we've been looking to the South Africans to guide us on Omicron, given that that's where we felt that it was first discovered. He said at a press conference that only 1.7% of identified COVID-19 cases admitted to hospital when it comes to Omicron. A microbiologist saying that the Brits are overreacting, alarmist and hysterical.
Well, I wouldn't accept that. There's two things just to say about South Africa. And of course, we looked at all the international experience. But first of all, they've got a younger population, and we know that the virus and the variants can have a worse impact in terms of the severity on older populations. Also, South Africa had been hit pretty hard by earlier variants. So when you look at the data, including from abroad, it is no, and you look at the modelling, and there's been a big debate around that over the weekend, it's no substitute for the raw numbers coming in the UK, which is why the one thing we do know is that the Omicron is doubling every 2 or 3 days, and also that if you get your third jab, you're over 70% likely to be protected, which is why our effort has been on that.
Absolutely.
And we're making great strides. Over 50% of people have now had their, of adults have now had their booster.
Let's put to one side then what's happening in South Africa. Let's quote you from last Tuesday when you were on the programme with me. You said concerns are overstated and we will have a great Christmas. Is that still the case?
I think we will have a much better Christmas than last year because of the vaccination level, both the overall vaccination level, but particularly the impact of the booster campaign. And we saw on Saturday, just in one day, 900,000 people get their booster. And I do think, of course, you've heard it from the Health Secretary over the weekend. I'd echo that. People will need to be careful and cautious. But I do think that, again, subject to the data, and it's always under review, that we're in a better position to enjoy Christmas with loved ones this year.
Will we have any more restrictions between now and Christmas Day?
Well, I just can't make hard, fast guarantees because, as
Why
I said,
not?
we follow...
I mean, you said we were going to have a great Christmas last week, and now you're saying a good Christmas, but I can't even guarantee that there are going to be any fewer restrictions or more restrictions.
Well, I think because there's two things. First of all, we're in a much different place. We're in a much stronger place because of the resilience of our communities, because of the high take-up of the vaccine. That's something that has gone very well, not just the overall vaccine rates, but the booster. And we're really supercharging that through to the end of this month and through to Christmas. So that gives us an extra layer of resilience. The rules as they currently are the best mitigation strategy that we've got. But of course, there is this time lag in the data. We know Omicron is spreading fast. We don't yet know the severity, and we're reliant on seeing that data come through, and it comes through day by day.
Yeah, and we have to listen to what the scientists are saying. Last week, the scientists were saying that the infections could be as high as 200,000 per day before the end of the year. And when I spoke to the Health Secretary on Monday, he was saying 200,000 that day, more or less. We have to, that's now been quietly dropped. We have to change these figures all the time, as you said, depending on the data. How bad is it this Monday as opposed to last Monday?
Well, so just to say, there's the difference between modelling, which relies on certain assumptions, and the hard data that's coming through, which is why, as I said, you can't make hard and fast guarantees. We have to track the data as it comes through. Which bit of data are you asking me about for today?
I'm asking you about how many infections you think we've had today, or yesterday, I should say, rather, because obviously we don't know today. We've only just started today. Not everybody's up as early as us.
No, I know. The latest data shows, and I've got it here because, of course, it's relevant and I know people are interested, 82,000 latest daily cases.
It's a lot less than 200,000, isn't it?
That's and 900 hospitalisations and 45 deaths. That's overall. We talked earlier about the Omicron. But look, a lot of the modelling that is being thrown around is the worst case scenario, which of course we're duty bound to consider. But we ultimately come back to this point. You have to test the data in real time against real cases and see that lag between spread of cases, hospitalisations, and what does it mean for severity in terms of, tragically, the number of deaths.
Yeah, modelling that's been thrown around. Should we take it with a pinch of salt?
No, but we should test it very carefully and rigorously, and that's what we're doing.
OK, let me ask you about a question that actually my son put to me, and I didn't know the answer, but you're much cleverer than me, so you will know. If you test positive for COVID, and then every day you have a lateral flow test that you register that's positive until the infection's gone through your body, every day that's registered, is that registered as a different case?
No, it shouldn't be, because it should attach to you. But the truth is, I'd have to look at the methodology that they use. But I would have thought that should attract to you because you register it under your name.
Yeah, so it could, in theory, be 10 times higher than the actual figures. So, but you don't think that's the case?
Look, it's a very good methodological question. As usual, I would want to just defer to what DHS say about the way that they count. But it doesn't seem right that that would be counted for the obvious reasons.
Yes, we'll have to look at that. Reports suggesting 10 ministers are questioning the scientific advice. Are you one of them?
We always, all of us, question the advice, and I don't think that should be presented in some sort of tectonic opposition to the scientists. The scientists will tell you that they are constantly testing the evidence and the advice amongst themselves, let alone with politicians. So it's quite right that we get the balance right. The one thing I'd say is right the way throughout, before we went into lockdown, when we went into lockdown, I remember looking at the 5 tests when we were in lockdown and we were thinking about how we could come out. We always look at the COVID impact, the non-COVID health impacts, the impacts on the economy, jobs and livelihoods, but also the social impacts as well. And that's the paradigm that we've had throughout this pandemic, and we still do.
So you are one of them?
No, sorry, I fully support the approach that the government has taken so far. But it's absolutely right. I mean, it'd be odd if Cabinet and ministers weren't, in the meetings we have, testing the data and the approach. Actually, that's very healthy.
Absolutely. That's why I was asking you if you were one of them.
Yeah, but what I don't do is bandy around. I support the approach the Prime Minister and the government has taken. I think these are finely balanced calls, but I totally support what we're doing, including what Rishi has done and the Treasury have done to support businesses. What I don't do is have those rigorous discussions which are rightly take place in private in the Cabinet and then bandy them around, because, to be honest with you, and I'm not knocking what you're doing, it leads to mischievous media reporting. And actually what you should have in government is really robust debate and then discipline when you take decisions, and that's what we're doing.
OK. I think there's another Cobra meeting today, isn't there? The Prime Minister wasn't at the one yesterday. I believe he's going to be at the one today. Will you be there as well?
I will turn up to any of the meetings to which I'm invited to.
Have you been invited?
There's a difference between Cobra and COVID-0, but allow me, I'm going into the office shortly afterwards, and I'll be available for any meetings that I'm needed for.
OK, here comes a question about that photograph that's on the front pages of the papers today. The PM enjoying wine and cheese. I know you're going to say that it was a business meeting, etc., etc. When was the last time you took your wife and baby to a business meeting?
Well, in fairness, I don't live in the place of work where I work. So number 10 Downing Street and the garden is used for work. It was used throughout that week. I think the PM is there seen just after the press conference he'd done, and people, folk at home will remember the daily press conferences, and he'd had meetings earlier, I think, with the health secretary earlier in the day or in the week. And you can see staff there. And look, so it's fundamentally a place of work. So this was not a question of whether...
You can't take your baby to work, especially when we're in the middle of a lockdown and a COVID pandemic, surely?
Well, but Kate, as you know, number 10 is also the residence of the Prime Minister. He's got a very young family, and I think if you begrudge his wife coming down in a break from the business of the day,
but
I don't think that's right.
She's not just popped her head round the door, has she? She sat down with the baby, nursing the baby. There's wine on the table, there's cheese there. There's at least 14, 15 other people in the garden.
And that's because it's a place of work. They're all in suits, or predominantly in informal attire. Well, the picture I saw had people...
No, it's on the screen at the moment. Have a look.
Well, look, I think a large number of them... to be honest with you, look, the Prime Minister is in a suit, the officials there. But look, the point I'd make is this.
Have a look.
Well, so some of them have taken their jackets off. But Kay...
So it's only a business meeting if you've got a suit on?
Well, now you're changing your tune.
No, I'm asking you. I'm trying to see your point of view, Deputy
then
Prime Minister.
Let me answer, Kay. You normally do. You're normally fair about these things. This is a place of work, but it's also the residence of the Prime Minister. And sometimes, as in many work situations, particularly given the pressures that the number 10 team are under, they might have a drink after the formal business has ended. That is not anything to do with the social mixing rules, and it's consistent with the guidance at the time.
Let me ask you this then. Why would somebody take a picture of a business meeting?
Well, who knows? But there's been all sorts of pictures like that flying around. Clearly someone with an animus, but I don't know, is the short answer to the question.
But if you were in number 11 and you saw people gathering in the garden, you wouldn't think, oh, that's a lovely picture. It's like a Rembrandt. I'll just take a quick photograph of that.
I don't think it looks like a Rembrandt. I totally
No, it
agree
doesn't. It looks like people gathering when they shouldn't be. And so people at number 11, being a little bit mischievous, are taking a photograph of it and thinking, I'll put that in my back pocket for when I need it.
I couldn't possibly comment on someone's motivation. What I can say is number 10, including the garden, is a place of work, and they were there having worked.
Can you accept that it looks a bit dodgy?
It looks a bit... Look, I certainly take your point that perception with the public is very important. What I would say is I'd point to and let people look at the photo for themselves. Number 10 is a place of work, also the Prime Minister's home, and they use the garden for work meetings, and that's what you can see.
OK. Do you anticipate being called back to Parliament before Christmas?
I don't anticipate it, but the PM has been very clear that if there were changes in the regulations, that would require a decision of Parliament.
OK. I'm always keen to hear what you have to say, Deputy Prime Minister. I'm sorry if you felt that I was talking over you. Hopefully I'll see you again soon. I'm sure I won't see you before Christmas. Have a very lovely, peaceful one. Thank you, with the family. No official word yet on whether the government will impose new lockdown restrictions to stop the spread of Omicron. Joining us is Ravi Gupta, Professor of Clinical Microbiology and a member of the Government Advisory Group on New and Emerging Respiratory Virus Threats. Hello to you. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. How concerned are you about the increase in numbers and deaths of Omicron this morning that we just heard about from the Deputy Prime Minister?
Well, I think that it is of serious concern, isn't it? We have an escalating number of cases that really has reached levels that we haven't seen before in terms of the rate of increase. If you remember a few weeks ago, we were still dominated by Delta. Now that has changed within a very short space of time. It's replicated what we've seen in other countries, for example, South Africa, where there was a very, very large and rapid increase in viruses that were indicative of Omicron. And so the action that's needed really is going to be quite significant, because we're in a situation quite different from last year, but really it's still of grave concern, because of course the sheer numbers that are going to be affected because of the increased transmissibility of this virus is going to potentially overwhelm our health service. So that's a really critical situation that we're facing.
Based on what?
Based on the fact that even if the virus, even if vaccines protect us to a significant degree, then the increased transmissibility and penetration of the virus into communities that we're seeing already is of course putting a large amount of pressure, because a very small fraction of a very large number still translates to significant numbers being hospitalized.
How damaging is Omicron on the respiratory system as opposed to Delta?
So that's an area that's still being investigated. Our group and others are demonstrating that Omicron has properties that have surprised us to some degree, and we've known for a week or so now that the virus, of course, does escape some degree of the antibodies that we make after traditional vaccination with the original strain, and that was expected from its mutational, or the mutations that we saw in it. But some experiments that have been done in different groups are suggesting that the virus has kind of altered the way it infects cells, and this is again potentially due to some of the mutations that have occurred. And there may, and this is a big caveat, there may be a slightly different profile for this virus. Nonetheless, even if it were a little bit milder in a very broad sense, the sheer numbers of cases would still translate into some individuals becoming quite sick. So we're not anticipating that this virus, because of these changes, is going to suddenly become harmless. I think that shouldn't be the interpretation of the work that we and others are doing. But what we are saying is that we are learning about the virus all the time. If we do come to some conclusions about its pathogenicity or how severe it is, those conclusions are likely to come in the next few weeks, and by then, really, we need to have made decisions on how or if we're going to control the spread of the virus. So, unfortunately, the timing of this scientific work isn't quite quick enough to inform decision making, I don't think.
Why are we not relying on microbiologists and scientists in other parts of the world who are ahead of us when it comes to Omicron? And they say that we are being alarmist and hysterical and overreacting.
Yes, I mean there are different viewpoints. The experience in South Africa of a very steep increase, but then a sort of leveling off to some extent in the number of cases, and hospitalizations that didn't continue in the sort of way that we had expected, could be due to a number of different factors. And so that the concern really is that the population structure in South Africa is quite different to the one we have here. We have a far more elderly population, and therefore, and of course, our experience with Delta was slightly different. So there are some things that are feeding into the decision making to say that maybe we should take a more cautious approach. Now, I'm sort of in the middle of my personal viewpoint is that I'm in the middle of the two sort of views on this. And so I think the restrictions we've had were important. I think we could go further, but I'm not necessarily saying that a full lockdown would be is the essential policy decision. But of course, I'm not the policymaker, and all I do is do scientific research and advise accordingly. So
okay. Understood, Professor. I mean, let's stick with South Africa then. It's without question that their population is much younger than ours, but also it has much less pickup as far as both vaccinations and the booster is concerned. And from what you were saying to start with, we have greater protection because of those vaccinations and boosters. So we may have an older population, but we are better protected from Omicron, are we not?
It certainly is through vaccination. There is a higher vaccine-related protection in the population overall. On the other hand, the Delta variant spread very extensively in South Africa and infected potentially between 60 and 80% of the population.
Yeah, but most of those were unvaccinated.
That's right. So whoever had survived would have quite reasonable levels of immunity. to Delta and potentially some cross protection against other variants of concern, and of course cross protection against severe disease. So that's potentially one of the factors that explains what happened in South Africa. You have to remember that if a significant number of people die, then the people that are left are the ones who potentially are less sensitive to severe disease or more resistant to severe.
That, but you're saying if a significant number of people die, we're trying to get to the bottom of whether that is likely to be the case or not, projected from what we can see has happened in South Africa. And of course, we respect those scientists significantly, don't we? Which is why they managed to discover the Omicron variant, first of all.
Yes, no, I agree. It is a difficult area, and the models do depend on what the numbers are that go into the models. And so one of my concerns, worries, is that we don't know enough about the Omicron's biology. We can see that it is different, but as I said, we're not going to have the information to put into those models in time. So I do agree there is a debate to be had here, and it's good that we're having it. But really, I can't sort of take it any further. I can say that South Africa does have a different profile. It may be because of some underlying factors due to the population structure or recent infections. And the experience in the UK may be similar, or it may be quite different. We were seeing signals certainly of increased hospitalizations, certainly in London, where Omicron is now becoming more and more dominant. And so that has obviously compounded some of those fears that we may be different than South Africa.
OK, it's good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for your expertise this morning, Professor. Thank you. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Just want to bring you some breaking news. Israel apparently banning travel to the United States over COVID-19 Omicron concerns. That according to official statement within the last few moments. Meantime, Germany joining the list of countries imposing tough new restrictions on all visitors from the UK. We brought you the news last week that France was effectively closing its borders to almost all UK travellers, devastating people's Christmas travel plans. Ewan Rollins, who was one of those hoping to celebrate Christmas in France, is with us now. Hello to you. Thanks for joining us. Tell us what's happening.
Hi there. No, thank you for having me on. So I'm a student at the University of Bristol, and I was planning to go home for Christmas to see my family who live over there, and my extended family was going to come over as well. Sadly, that couldn't happen due to the new restrictions, and I'm stuck here in Bristol.
Tell us about how and where you heard the news and how you felt about it.
I initially heard the news on the news and from my parents. It was difficult, for sure. There was always the underlying possibility of not being able to go home and of the possibility of new COVID restrictions preventing a large family gathering. So yeah, it was very disappointing when I heard about it, but at the same time, not entirely unexpected. So,
where does that leave you for Christmas? You at home with a turkey butty on your own?
Yeah, I'm in my student house in Bristol, and so I'm here alone, and that's about it. I'm maybe going to have a nice meal I made, and that's about it. Maybe a Zoom call if I'm lucky.
No, that's rubbish. Are you free on Christmas morning? Do you want to come and talk to us via Zoom on the telly?
I don't know. We'll see.
Oh, well, if you want somebody to chat to, we can definitely have a chat with you. I'm doing the breakfast programme on Christmas morning, so come and chat to us. Do you accept why it's had to be done?
Oh, yes, of course. There's kind of been the underlying tension. In some sense, I wouldn't want to bring COVID back to France. I love seeing my family, and I love seeing them all. Don't get me wrong, but the possibility of bringing COVID back to my parents and to my extended family is kind of one that I always had a bit in the back of my mind. And so for France to lock down and to stop UK travellers from coming over is very reasonable, I think.
OK. Well, I'm glad that you can see it from the government's point of view. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And don't forget, come and join us on Christmas morning if you want to. If you get up early enough, young man. I know what students are like.
Yeah, that's a large ask.
It's good to talk to you. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Did you know that reducing pollution outside of school can help stop toxic air getting trapped in our classrooms?
Monday morning will start off grey and gloomy with fog patches and some spots of drizzle. It'll be chilly under any cloud breaks in the northwest with a patchy frost. Brighter spells will develop through the day as slightly cooler conditions spread in from the east. It'll be windy in the far southwest. Temperatures will drop slightly in the east during the afternoon as the cooler air mass moves in. Low levels of air pollution are expected on Monday, measuring between 1 and 3 on the Daily Air Quality Index.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
And most spectacular wild animals, there you are, is facing a growing threat from poachers. In the last few weeks, rangers in South Africa say at least 24 rhinos have been killed. Joining us, Cathy Dean, the Chief Exec of Save the Rhino International. Hi, thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. Tell us more.
Hello, Kay. Yes, we were hoping that statistics, rhino poaching stats across Africa would continue to drop after last year, which was a low for the last decade. But then the news that 24 animals being killed in the first 2 weeks of this month was pretty depressing, not entirely unexpected in that previous years there have been spikes in poaching leading up to Christmas and up to the Chinese New Year.
What is that? I know why, but just to explain to our viewers why that is.
So consumers in East Asia, in China and Vietnam, prize rhino horn. It really is a form of bling. If you are wealthy enough and powerful enough and have the connections to be able to buy illegal rhino horn, it demonstrates status. A much lesser use is these days of rhino horn for traditional Chinese medicine to bring down fevers. It's really all about showing off how wealthy you are.
OK. Has the pandemic made the situation worse as far as rhinos are concerned?
It's sort of, I guess, a game of two halves. In one way, the travel restrictions last year and this year have slowed down the ease of trafficking rhino horns, whether that's in country, in South Africa, for example, for a lot of last year, there were extensive roadblocks and so on. You had to have good reason to be moving around. You had to have a permit. And a lot of poachers turned to other forms of illegal activity. There was a brief prohibition on the sale of alcohol and cigarettes, and it was kind of much quicker, easier and less risky for potential poachers to turn their hand to other crimes. And then, of course, without international flights, it was not as easy for mules to be trafficking rhino horn across in their luggage. So that was on the positive side. Of course, on the negative side, tourism has been completely destroyed for the last 18 months. Without the income from park entry fees, from lodges, from hotels and so on, and all the employment that brings, there have been mass redundancies. And of course, if you have rangers who have not been paid or have been made unemployed, they may well feel aggrieved. And of course, they know the inside routine on security patrols and so on. They can be corrupted if they're unpaid and desperate to feed their families. Of course, they're natural targets for the syndicates.
OK, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for highlighting that, Cathy. Much appreciated.
Thank you.